The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the opulent dining hall as President Moon Jae-in stepped through the gilded doors of Buckingham Palace. In his hand, he carried more than just diplomatic credentials. He held the hopes of 51 million South Koreans and the weight of centuries-old traditions about to collide with modern geopolitics. Tonight's banquet would not merely be about exquisite cuisine and royal protocol. It would be a carefully orchestrated performance where every gesture, every toast, and every shared laugh could reshape the relationship between two nations separated by 5,000 miles, but united by shared democratic values and an unbreakable commitment to global peace. As the president's polished shoes clicked against the marble floor, neither he nor Queen Elizabeth II could have imagined that this evening would become one of the most talked-about diplomatic events of the 21st century, setting precedents that would influence international relations for decades to come. The morning of November 21st, 2023, dawned crisp and clear over London, but inside the walls of Buckingham Palace, a different kind of energy buzzed through the corridors. Staff members moved with practiced precision, their footsteps echoing through the grand halls as they prepared for what would become one of the most significant state banquets in recent memory. The occasion was the official state visit of President Moon Jae-in of South Korea, and every detail had been meticulously planned to honor both the visiting dignitary and the long-standing friendship between the United Kingdom and South Korea. Queen Elizabeth II, despite her advanced age, personally oversaw many of the preparations. Her keen eye for detail and decades of experience hosting world leaders made her involvement crucial to the evening's success. She walked through the ballroom, examining the placement of each piece of the finest china, ensuring that the George IV State Service gleamed under the magnificent chandeliers. The Queen understood that this banquet was more than a formal dinner. It was a statement of solidarity between two democratic nations facing similar challenges in an increasingly complex global landscape. President Moon had arrived in London 3 days earlier, beginning his state visit with meetings at Downing Street and various diplomatic engagements throughout the city. His itinerary had been carefully crafted to showcase the breadth of UK-South Korea cooperation, from trade agreements to cultural exchanges. However, everyone knew that tonight's banquet would be the crown jewel of his visit, the moment when centuries of British royal tradition would embrace the dynamic spirit of modern South Korea. The preparation for such an event began weeks in advance. The royal household's master of the household worked closely with the South Korean embassy to ensure that every aspect of Korean culture and preferences were respectfully incorporated into the evening's festivities. Dietary requirements were carefully noted, cultural sensitivities were discussed, and even the musical selections for the evening were chosen to reflect both British classical traditions and Korean cultural elements. In the palace kitchens, royal chef Mark Flanagan and his team had spent days perfecting a menu that would honor both British culinary traditions and Korean tastes. The challenge was significant: how to create a meal that would satisfy the sophisticated palates of international diplomats while remaining true to the formal structure of a British state banquet. The solution came through careful collaboration with Korean culinary experts, resulting in a fusion approach that respected both cultures without compromising either. The guest list for the evening read like a who's who of British and international society. Beyond the obvious diplomatic core, the Queen had invited prominent business leaders, academics, and cultural figures who had contributed to UK-South Korea relations. Each invitation was personally approved by the Queen, reflecting her understanding that such gatherings serve multiple purposes beyond mere diplomacy. They are opportunities to strengthen economic ties, foster cultural understanding, and build personal relationships that often prove more valuable than formal treaties. As afternoon turned to evening, the transformation of Buckingham Palace was remarkable to witness. The ballroom, normally impressive in its grandeur, became something truly spectacular. Tables were arranged in a U shape, allowing all guests clear sight lines to the high table where the Queen and President Moon would sit. Each place setting included multiple pieces of silverware, crystal glasses for different wines, and carefully folded napkins bearing the royal cipher. The attention to detail was extraordinary. Even the flowers had been chosen to reflect both British and Korean national symbols. The media attention surrounding the banquet was intense. International news outlets had positioned cameras throughout London, capturing every moment of the president's journey from his hotel to the palace. Royal watchers and diplomatic correspondents analyzed every detail, from the choice of transportation to the specific members of the royal family who would attend. The banquet represented a perfect intersection of public fascination with royal protocol and genuine international political significance. Inside the palace, final preparations continued at a fever pitch. Members of the royal household staff, many of whom had served through multiple state visits, moved with the confidence that comes from years of experience. Yet there was an unmistakable sense of anticipation in the air. State banquets are among the rarest and most formal events in the royal calendar, and each one carries its own unique significance. Tonight's banquet was particularly special because it celebrated not just diplomatic relations, but a genuine friendship between nations. The Queen's personal preparation for the evening was a study in royal tradition and personal style. Her choice of attire, jewelry, and even her perfume would be noted and analyzed by observers around the world. More importantly, she spent considerable time reviewing her speeches and familiarizing herself with Korean customs and current events. Despite her decades of experience, she approached each state banquet with the same careful preparation that had made her one of history's most effective diplomatic figures. President Moon's preparation was equally thorough. His team had briefed him extensively on British royal protocol, but they had also worked to ensure that his presence at the banquet would effectively represent South Korean interests and values. The president understood that while the evening would be steeped in British tradition, it was also an opportunity to showcase South Korea's emergence as a major global power and cultural influence. As 6 o'clock approached, the first guests began arriving at the palace. The sight of diplomatic cars pulling through the gates, their flags flying proudly, created a sense of international pageantry that few events can match. Each arrival was carefully coordinated, with guests escorted through the palace's magnificent staterooms before gathering in the designated reception areas. The conversations that began during these pre-dinner moments often proved as valuable as the formal proceedings that would follow. The atmosphere throughout the palace was one of controlled excitement. Staff members who had worked on the preparations for weeks could finally see their efforts coming together. The combination of British royal grandeur and Korean cultural elements created a unique ambience that honored both traditions while pointing toward a shared future. Security personnel, largely invisible but constantly present, ensured that the evening would proceed without incident, allowing diplomacy and friendship to take center stage. As the final preparations were completed and the last guests arrived, the stage was set for an evening that would be remembered not just for its spectacular displays of royal hospitality, but for its role in strengthening the bonds between two nations committed to democracy, innovation, and international cooperation. The banquet was about to begin, and, with it, a new chapter in the long history of British-Korean relations. The sound of the palace orchestra tuning their instruments drifted through the corridors as guests assembled in the designated reception rooms. The pre-banquet gathering was a carefully orchestrated affair, allowing dignitaries to mingle in the relaxed yet formal atmosphere that only Buckingham Palace could provide. Conversations flowed in multiple languages as diplomats, business leaders, and cultural figures exchanged pleasantries, and renewed acquaintances formed over years of international cooperation. Queen Elizabeth II entered the blue drawing room at precisely 7 o'clock, her presence immediately commanding the attention of everyone present. She wore an elegant gown of midnight blue silk, complemented by the stunning diamond diadem and a selection of sapphire jewelry that sparkled under the room's magnificent lighting. Her choice of blue was deliberate, reflecting both the colors of the South Korean flag and her own personal preference for the color during state occasions. The Queen moved through the reception with practiced grace, engaging each guest in brief but meaningful conversation. President Moon Jae-in stood nearby, resplendent in formal evening wear, accompanied by his wife, Kim Young-suk, who wore a beautiful hanbok-inspired gown that honored her Korean heritage while respecting the formal nature of the British state banquet. The First Lady's outfit had been the subject of considerable discussion among fashion experts and cultural observers, as it represented a perfect fusion of traditional Korean elements with contemporary formal where suitable for such a prestigious occasion. The introduction between the Queen and President Moon was a moment of particular significance. Royal protocol demanded specific procedures, but the genuine warmth between the two leaders was immediately apparent. They had met previously during international gatherings, but this was their first extended private conversation, and observers noted the ease with which they communicated. Their discussion touched on everything from global challenges to shared interests in cultural preservation and international cooperation. Among the distinguished guests circulating through the reception rooms was the Korean ambassador to the United Kingdom, whose tireless work over the preceding months had helped ensure the visit's success. He moved between groups of guests, facilitating introductions and ensuring that the evening's diplomatic objectives were being met even during these informal moments. His presence served as a bridge between the British hosts and Korean visitors, smoothing any potential cultural misunderstandings before they could develop. The British Foreign Secretary engaged in animated conversation with members of the Korean delegation, discussing recent developments in trade relations and the potential for expanded cooperation in emerging technologies. These conversations, while informal in setting, often proved more productive than formal diplomatic meetings, as the relaxed atmosphere encouraged frank discussion of complex issues. The presence of business leaders from both countries added another dimension to these discussions, as they could speak directly to the practical implications of political decisions. Throughout the reception, photographers from the royal household captured moments that would become part of the official record of the visit. These images, carefully composed and respectful of diplomatic protocol, would later appear in official publications and media coverage around the world. The photographers worked with practiced discretion, ensuring that their presence never intruded upon the natural flow of conversation and interaction among the guests. The palace staff moved through the reception areas with silver trays of champagne and canapes, each server trained to the highest standards of royal service. Their movements were choreographed to ensure that every guest was properly attended to without any interruption to the ongoing conversations. The canapes themselves have been specially designed to incorporate both British and Korean flavors, providing guests with a preview of the cultural fusion that would characterize the evening's main meal. As 8 o'clock approached, the yeomen of the guard in their distinctive Tudor uniforms took their positions throughout the palace corridors. Their presence added a ceremonial element that connected the evening's events to centuries of British royal tradition. For many of the Korean guests, this was their first exposure to such ancient pageantry, and their fascination with these living traditions was evident in their careful observation of every detail. The transition from reception to banquet began with a subtle signal from the master of the household. Guests gradually moved from the reception rooms toward the ballroom, guided by staff members who ensured that everyone understood the proper procedures for entering the dining hall. This movement was carefully timed to avoid any confusion or delay, as the formal procession that would follow required precise coordination. The Korean delegation had been thoroughly briefed on British royal protocol, but experiencing it firsthand proved far more impressive than any written description could convey. The grandeur of the palace's staterooms, the precision of the staff, and the weight of centuries of history created an atmosphere that even experienced diplomats found awe-inspiring. Several members of the Korean party commented quietly among themselves about the remarkable preservation of these traditions in the modern world. The formal procession into the ballroom was a moment of pure theatrical grandeur. Led by the Queen and President Moon, the guests filed into the magnificent dining hall in order of diplomatic precedence. The sight that greeted them was breathtaking. tables set with the finest crystal, silver, and china, all illuminated by the warm glow of countless candles and the brilliant light of the massive chandeliers overhead. The room itself seemed to embody the best of British royal tradition while welcoming guests from across the world. Each guest found their assigned seat marked with an elegant place card written in calligraphy. The seating arrangements had been planned with extraordinary care, ensuring that conversation would flow naturally between individuals with shared interests or complementary expertise. Language considerations have been taken into account, with interpreters discreetly positioned to assist when needed, though most guests were comfortable conversing in English. The Queen took her place at the center of the high table, with President Moon seated to her right in the traditional position of honor. Their conversation during the reception had established a rapport that would continue throughout the evening, with both leaders clearly enjoying each other's company. To the President's right sat the First Lady, who engaged in animated discussion with the Duke of Cambridge about cultural preservation initiatives in both countries. The atmosphere in the ballroom was one of anticipation mixed with appreciation for the extraordinary setting. Many guests paused to absorb the full impact of their surroundings before taking their seats. The combination of architectural grandeur, artistic treasures, and ceremonial elements created an environment unlike anything else in the modern world. For the Korean guests especially, this represented a unique opportunity to experience British royal hospitality at its finest. As the last guests found their places and settled into their chairs, the evening's formal proceedings were ready to begin. The successful completion of the reception and transition to dinner had set a positive tone for what promised to be an unforgettable evening of diplomacy, culture, and international friendship. The careful planning and flawless execution evident in every detail reinforced the significance of the occasion and the mutual respect between the two nations being celebrated. The moment had arrived for the formal commencement of the state banquet. As guests settled into their seats around the magnificent U-shaped table arrangement, the Queen rose gracefully to her feet, commanding immediate attention throughout the ballroom. The gentle clinking of crystal and silver gradually faded into respectful silence as all eyes turned toward the monarch who had presided over countless such occasions throughout her remarkable reign. Queen Elizabeth II's opening remarks were delivered with a warmth and authority that had made her one of the world's most respected diplomatic figures. She spoke of the long friendship between the United Kingdom and South Korea, acknowledging the remarkable transformation of South Korea from a war-torn nation into a global economic and cultural powerhouse. Her words carried particular weight given her personal witness to much of this historical transformation, having reigned during the entire period of South Korea's extraordinary development. The Queen's speech touched on shared values between the two nations, emphasizing their mutual commitment to democracy, human rights, and international cooperation. She highlighted the growing economic ties between the countries, noting that South Korea had become one of the UK's most important trading partners in Asia. Her recognition of South Korean achievements in technology, culture, and international diplomacy demonstrated her thorough understanding of contemporary global affairs and her genuine appreciation for President Moon's leadership. President Moon's response was equally thoughtful and gracious. Rising from his seat to address the assembled guests, he spoke eloquently about the honor of being received with such magnificent hospitality. His remarks acknowledged the historical significance of British support during Korea's most challenging periods, while also looking forward to expanded cooperation in addressing current global challenges. The president's fluent English and natural charisma impressed the British guests, many of whom were encountering him in person for the first time. The cultural exchange evident in these opening speeches set the tone for the entire evening. Both leaders demonstrated deep respect for each other's traditions while articulating a shared vision for future cooperation. Their words resonated throughout the ballroom, where guests from diverse backgrounds found common ground in their appreciation for the diplomatic artistry being displayed before them. Following the formal speeches, the first course was served with the precision and elegance that characterized all aspects of royal hospitality. The menu had been carefully crafted to honor both British culinary traditions and Korean tastes, beginning with a delicate amuse-bouche that incorporated traditional British ingredients prepared with techniques inspired by Korean cuisine. Each guest received identical service, delivered simultaneously by the palace's expertly trained staff. The wine service throughout the evening was particularly noteworthy, featuring selections from the royal cellar that had been chosen to complement both the food and the international nature of the gathering. The sommelier had worked closely with Korean wine experts to ensure that the pairings would appeal to all palates while maintaining the formal structure expected at a state banquet. Each wine was presented with appropriate ceremony, adding to the overall elegance of the dining experience. Conversation flowed naturally among the guests as the meal progressed through its various courses. The seating arrangements proved their worth as individuals from different countries and backgrounds discovered shared interests and opportunities for future collaboration. Business leaders discussed potential joint ventures, academics explored research partnerships, and cultural figures planned exchange programs that would benefit both nations. The main course featured traditional British beef prepared with Korean-inspired seasonings and accompaniments, a culinary metaphor for the evening's broader theme of cultural fusion and mutual respect. The presentation was spectacular, with each plate composed like a work of art while maintaining the hearty satisfaction expected from such a formal meal. Guest reactions ranged from surprised delight to genuine appreciation for the innovative approach to diplomatic dining. Throughout the meal, the Queen demonstrated her remarkable gift for conversation, engaging guests at nearby tables in discussions that ranged from light-hearted cultural observations to serious policy considerations. Her ability to make each individual feel personally welcomed while maintaining the dignity appropriate to the occasion was a masterclass in diplomatic hosting. President Moon proved equally adept at connecting with British guests, sharing insights into Korean culture and perspectives on international affairs. The evening's entertainment featured a carefully selected program that honored both nations' cultural heritage. A British chamber ensemble performed pieces by Elgar and Vaughan Williams, while a Korean traditional music group presented selections that showcased the beauty and sophistication of Korean classical music. The juxtaposition of these different musical traditions created a unique artistic experience that perfectly complemented the evening's diplomatic objectives. The dessert course arrived as a spectacular finale to the culinary journey, featuring traditional British pudding reimagined with Korean flavors and presentation techniques. The visual presentation was stunning, with each dessert crafted to represent elements from both cultures. Guests paused to photograph these edible works of art before savoring the innovative flavors that somehow managed to honor both traditions simultaneously. Coffee and liqueurs were served in the adjoining staterooms, allowing guests to move freely and continue conversations begun during dinner. This transition marked a subtle shift from formal dining to more relaxed socializing, though the atmosphere remained appropriately dignified for such a prestigious occasion. The palace's magnificent art collection provided natural conversation starters as guests admired paintings and artifacts that represented centuries of British royal heritage. The photographic opportunities throughout the evening were carefully managed to ensure appropriate documentation, while respecting the private nature of diplomatic conversations. Official photographers captured key moments, including the speeches, toasts, and group photographs, while ensuring that more sensitive discussions could proceed without interruption. These images would later serve as important historical records of a significant moment in UK-South Korea relations. As the evening progressed, it became clear that the banquet was achieving its diplomatic objectives while providing genuine enjoyment for all participants. The combination of spectacular setting, excellent food and wine, and carefully curated guest list had created an atmosphere conducive to both formal diplomacy and personal relationship building. Many participants would later describe the evening as one of the most impressive state occasions they had ever attended. The success of the cultural fusion evident throughout the meal and entertainment demonstrated the potential for deeper cooperation between the two nations. Guests frequently commented on how naturally British and Korean elements have been combined, suggesting that future collaborations in various fields might prove equally successful. This cultural diplomacy complemented the formal political discussions that had occurred earlier in President Moon's visit. As the evening entered its final phase, the atmosphere in the staterooms became increasingly warm and convivial. The formal structure of the banquet had given way to more relaxed mingling, allowing guests to engage in deeper conversations about shared interests and future collaborations. The Queen, despite her advanced age, remained actively engaged with various groups of guests, demonstrating the stamina and dedication that had characterized her entire reign. One of the most significant conversations of the evening occurred between President Moon and several British technology executives who were eager to explore partnerships with Korean companies. The discussion centered on artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and biotechnology, areas where both countries had developed considerable expertise. These business leaders recognized that South Korea's rapid innovation in these fields presented enormous opportunities for collaboration, while President Moon appreciated the British commitment to ethical technology development and regulatory frameworks. The Korean First Lady found herself at the center of an animated discussion about cultural exchange programs with several British museum directors and cultural institution leaders. Her background in vocal performance and deep appreciation for the arts made her an ideal advocate for expanding artistic cooperation between the two countries. Plans began to take shape for touring exhibitions, artist residencies, and educational exchanges that would benefit cultural institutions in both nations. Throughout the evening, the palace staff continued to provide impeccable service, ensuring that every guest felt properly attended to while maintaining the discretion necessary for sensitive diplomatic conversations. Their professionalism was particularly evident during the transition between different phases of the evening, as they seamlessly managed the movement of nearly 200 guests while coordinating the various entertainment elements and maintaining the appropriate ceremonial atmosphere. The Korean delegation members found themselves genuinely impressed by the personal attention they received from their British counterparts. Rather than the formal exchanges they had expected, many discovered opportunities for meaningful professional relationships that extended far beyond the immediate diplomatic objectives of the visit. Academic partnerships, business ventures, and cultural collaborations were discussed with an enthusiasm that suggested these connections would continue long after President Moon's return to Seoul. The British guests were equally fascinated by their Korean counterparts, many admitting that their understanding of contemporary Korea had been limited to economic statistics and cultural exports like K-pop and Korean cinema. The personal interactions throughout the evening provided insights into Korean perspectives on global challenges, approaches to innovation, and cultural values that would inform future diplomatic and business relationships. As the evening progressed, several informal working groups began to form around specific topics of mutual interest. Climate change experts from both countries discovered remarkable alignment in their approaches to environmental challenges, leading to discussions about joint research initiatives and policy coordination. Defense and security professionals explored opportunities for enhanced cooperation in cybersecurity and emerging threats that both nations faced in the modern world. The success of these spontaneous collaborations demonstrated the value of bringing together diverse groups of influential individuals in an environment conducive to open communication. The palace setting, while formal and impressive, somehow encouraged genuine dialogue rather than the superficial exchanges that often characterize large diplomatic receptions. The careful selection of guests and the intimate scale of the gathering allowed for substantive conversations that might not have been possible in other formats. Queen Elizabeth II's personal engagement with President Moon throughout the evening was particularly noteworthy. Their conversations ranged from serious discussions about regional security challenges to lighter exchanges about family and personal interests. The Queen's genuine interest in Korean culture and her thoughtful questions about contemporary Korean society demonstrated her continued engagement with global affairs despite her advanced age. The evening's musical entertainment continued to provide a cultural bridge between the two nations. Following the formal performances during dinner, A more intimate jazz ensemble performed selections that incorporated both Western and Korean musical elements. Several guests commented on how naturally these different musical traditions blended, creating something that honored both cultures while producing something entirely new and beautiful. The technological achievements of South Korea became a frequent topic of conversation, with many British guests expressing admiration for Korea's digital infrastructure, innovative manufacturing, and emergence as a global leader in various high-tech industries. These discussions often evolved into explorations of how British expertise in financial services, education, and research could complement Korean strengths to create mutually beneficial partnerships. The palace's magnificent art collection provided natural conversation starters throughout the evening, with Korean guests particularly interested in pieces that reflected Britain's historical connections to Asia. The Queen personally guided President Moon through several of the staterooms, sharing stories about particular artworks and their significance to the royal collection. These informal tours created opportunities for a private conversation away from the larger group. The diplomatic corps present at the banquet represented numerous other nations, and their observations of the UK-Korea interactions provided valuable feedback about the broader international significance of the strengthened relationship. Several ambassadors expressed their own country's interest in developing similar partnerships with both the UK and South Korea, suggesting that the evening's success would have ripple effects throughout the international community. As midnight approached, the formal conclusion of the banquet was handled with the same careful attention to protocol that had characterized the entire evening. The Queen's final remarks to President Moon were delivered privately, but observers noted the warm handshake and mutual expressions of satisfaction with the visit's success. The Korean delegation's departure was coordinated with precision, ensuring that appropriate farewells were exchanged with all significant guests. The evening's success was immediately apparent in the reactions of participants and observers. Media coverage was overwhelmingly positive, with commentators noting the seamless blend of tradition and innovation that had characterized every aspect of the banquet. Social media responses from attendees highlighted the impressive hospitality and the meaningful connections formed throughout the evening. The practical outcomes of the banquet began to manifest almost immediately, with several business partnerships and cultural exchange agreements moving forward based on connections made during the evening. Universities in both countries initiated discussions about joint programs, while technology companies began exploring collaborative research and development projects that built upon conversations begun at the palace. The lasting impact of the evening extended far beyond the immediate diplomatic objectives of President Moon's visit. The relationships formed and strengthened during those few hours would continue to influence UK-Korea cooperation for years to come, demonstrating the enduring value of personal diplomacy in an increasingly digital world. The morning after the magnificent state banquet dawned with a sense of accomplishment that extended far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace. News of the evening's success had already begun circulating through diplomatic channels, with early media reports praising both the spectacular hospitality and the substantive diplomatic achievements that had emerged from the gathering. The combination of traditional royal pageantry and modern diplomatic innovation had created an event that would be remembered as a high point in UK-South Korea relations. President Moon's final day in London was filled with follow-up meetings that built directly upon connections made during the banquet. Several British business leaders who had engaged with the Korean delegation the previous evening requested formal meetings to explore partnership opportunities in greater detail. These sessions, held at the Korean Embassy and various London venues, demonstrated how effectively the banquet had facilitated meaningful business relationships that extended beyond ceremonial diplomacy. The Queen's private staff reported that Her Majesty had been particularly pleased with the evening's success. Despite her decades of experience hosting world leaders, she had found President Moon to be an exceptionally engaging guest whose genuine interest in British culture and history had made their interactions particularly rewarding. Her personal satisfaction with the visit contributed to the positive atmosphere that surrounded the conclusion of the Korean president's state visit. The cultural institutions that had participated in planning the evening's entertainment began implementing agreements reached during the banquet's informal conversations. The British Museum initiated discussions with Korean counterparts about a major exhibition of Korean art and artifacts, while the Royal Opera House explored possibilities for co-productions that would showcase both British and Korean musical traditions. These cultural exchanges promised to deepen public understanding between the two nations. University partnerships that had been discussed during the banquet quickly moved from concept to implementation. Oxford and Cambridge universities announced expanded exchange programs with leading Korean institutions, while several joint research initiatives in science and technology received preliminary funding commitments from both governments. The academic connections formed during the evening's conversations would prove to have lasting impact on educational cooperation between the countries. The technology sector collaborations that had emerged from banquet conversations began to take concrete form within weeks of the visit. British financial technology companies partnered with Korean manufacturers to develop innovative payment systems, while renewable energy firms from both countries initiated joint ventures to develop next-generation wind and solar technologies. These partnerships demonstrated how diplomatic events could catalyze practical economic cooperation. International observers noted the significance of the banquet's success for broader diplomatic relations. Other nations began requesting similar state visits to the United Kingdom, hoping to achieve comparable breakthroughs in their own bilateral relationships. The format and approach used for the Korean visit became a model for subsequent diplomatic entertaining, demonstrating the continuing relevance of traditional diplomatic methods in contemporary international relations. The Korean media's coverage of the banquet was extensive and overwhelmingly positive, with detailed descriptions of the Queen's personal attention to President Moon and the warm reception provided by British officials and business leaders. This positive coverage contributed to improved public opinion about the United Kingdom among Korean citizens, laying groundwork for expanded people-to-people connections between the two countries. The environmental initiatives discussed during the banquet developed into significant policy coordination between the two governments. Both countries committed to enhance cooperation on climate change research and renewable energy development, with specific joint projects announced within months of the visit. The personal relationships formed during the evening proved crucial in overcoming bureaucratic obstacles that might otherwise have delayed these important environmental partnerships. Security cooperation between the United Kingdom and South Korea expanded significantly following the successful banquet and state visit. The personal connections formed between defense officials during the evening facilitated enhanced intelligence, sharing, and joint training programs that strengthened both countries' capabilities to address emerging security challenges. These developments demonstrated how diplomatic hospitality could contribute to practical security cooperation. The fashion and design industries in both countries found new opportunities for collaboration based on connections made during the banquet. The Korean First Lady's elegant hanbok-inspired gown had generated considerable interest among British fashion designers, leading to cultural exchange programs that introduced Korean traditional designs to British audiences while providing Korean designers with access to British luxury markets. The success of the banquet's fusion approach to cuisine inspired restaurants and chefs in both countries to explore similar cultural combinations. Several high-profile London restaurants began featuring Korean-British fusion menus, while Korean establishments introduced British elements into their offerings. This culinary diplomacy helped introduce broader publics to the cultural connections being forged at diplomatic levels. The palace staff who had worked so diligently to ensure the banquet's success received widespread recognition for their professionalism and attention to detail. Their ability to seamlessly blend Korean cultural elements with British royal traditions had been crucial to the evening's diplomatic effectiveness. The precedents they established during the banquet influenced how future state visits would be planned and executed. Regional security discussions that began during the banquet continued through formal diplomatic channels, with both countries committing to enhance cooperation on North Korean issues and broader regional stability concerns. The personal trust established between officials during the informal banquet conversations facilitated more open discussions about sensitive security topics than might otherwise have been possible through traditional diplomatic mechanisms. The economic impact of a strengthened relationship became evident in trade statistics released months after the visit. Bilateral trade between the United Kingdom and South Korea increased significantly, with much of the growth attributable to partnerships and agreements that originated from connections made during the state banquet. These concrete economic benefits validated the investment in diplomatic hospitality and relationship building. The artistic collaborations discussed during the banquet evolved into major cultural events that brought Korean and British artists together in unprecedented ways. Joint productions in theater, music, and visual arts introduced audiences in both countries to new cultural perspectives while celebrating the shared values and mutual respect that had been reinforced throughout President Moon's visit. As the first anniversary of the banquet approached, both governments began planning commemorative events that would celebrate the success of the diplomatic breakthrough and the concrete achievements that had emerged from that memorable evening. The relationships forged over dinner at Buckingham Palace had proven their value through sustained cooperation across multiple sectors, demonstrating the enduring power of personal diplomacy in building bridges between nations. The legacy of that extraordinary November evening extended far beyond the immediate participants, influencing how both countries approached international relations and cultural exchange. The banquet had demonstrated that traditional diplomatic methods, when properly executed with genuine respect and cultural sensitivity, remained highly effective tools for building the personal relationships that underpin successful international cooperation in the modern world.